in China, what's going to happen for the next 20 years is there's going to be a 10% decrease in the overall workforce, but the average education level of the workforce is going to go way up because the people that are retiring now experienced, they grew up in the 1980s or something when China was very poor, and they did it. Only a few percent of them could go to college. So people retiring are not at all highly trained. People that are entering the workforce now are highly trained. So they have a huge human capital benefit that they're going to experience over the next 20 years. But if they don't fix the TFR, which is close to 1 now, then they're going to fall off a cliff.
My guest today is Steve Hsu. He is an academic, a physicist, a multiple deep tech startup founder, and a 21st century Renaissance man all around. And today we speak about China and the potential for Han technological supremacy, especially as it pertains to AI. We also speak about the demographic bottleneck that both societies are hurtling towards and how that will interplay with technology. We also speak about the potential of technology stealing our souls or enhancing them. We speak about our kids as well, and we speak about doom, AI doom, the possibilities and potential timelines for AI doom. I think this was a really rich conversation. Steve is an incredibly knowledgeable and erudite man. I think you will enjoy it. And if you do enjoy it, if you enjoy it very much, please do consider becoming a member of the community, the increasingly thriving and vibrant community on substack.com, which you can find at alexdeschuta.com, and also on Patreon, /AK Subversive, where you can find the audio of every podcast I've recorded. Please enjoy this conversation with Steve. A lot of people in my audience are at least relatively familiar with the trajectory of AI research in the West, especially in the US, where, the headlines are full of innovation, of bluster about what's going on, about new levels that have been surpassed, and a lot of people are using it. But there is kind of this mysterious entity that's also working in parallel with different intentions, different politics, obviously, which is China. So if you could maybe lay out a little bit the state of play, what is going on in China related to AI, how different is the technological level, what are the intentions, and maybe kind of how does Chinese politics set the tone for what's going on in AI?
So that's a great question. So, I would say, first of all, probably there are fewer differences than people think. So like a lot of the early takes, maybe a couple of years ago when ChatGPT first came out and people were wondering, oh, what's China going to do? People had all kinds of like lazy takes about how, well, because of the authoritarian government there, they won't be able to ship AI because they'll have to censor the AI too much. Or all the AI geniuses are in the United States, and so they won't be able to compete. Or all the NVIDIA chips, this came later after the sanctions, all the NVIDIA chips are in the United States, and so they won't be able to train their models, and we're going to be like 5 years ahead of them. And the actual reality of it is there are very few differences actually between what's going on there and what's going on here. And happy to go into this in great detail. You have a parallel set of internet platform companies there. So the counterpart of Google, the counterpart of Facebook, the counterpart of Microsoft, you have all of these big companies there who are in a way quasi-monopolies like the ones we have in the West. And so they have very, very steady, large revenues. They're able to hire a lot of really talented engineers. And generally the founders are like super pro tech, right? They're super pro AI. They understand the importance of AI. And so each of those companies has its own large language models similar to what Anthropic produces or what OpenAI produces or what Google produces. And if you look at the benchmarks, if you're actually an AI researcher and you test the models or you look at the benchmarks, you can see there's actually pretty decent parity. Like there is a US lead, but it's definitely not even a 1 year lead. It could be like a 6-month lead or even less, depending on what metrics you're using. Like their models tend to be faster and more efficient. They use less energy and they use less compute. Maybe in terms of quality or the real cutting edge of like reasoning capability, OpenAI is maybe still in the lead. So it's more similar than it is different. Um, a bunch of different directions we could go in. Like the chip war didn't really handicap them as much as some people thought, or as much as U.S. planners wanted. Um, the government there is not really restricting their ability to build these models and ship these models. In fact, one could argue that Google has to spend more effort in making its models woke than the Chinese developers have to expend to make their models not discuss the Tiananmen Square incident, right? So both sides have things they need to kind of constrain their models on. But you could actually argue that Google is more hampered by that than the labs in China. Let me stop there and let you react, because I can take this in any number of different directions.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and I don't know if it's hopeful or worrying or weird. I wonder what kind of Chinese thought makes of the concept of ethics in AI. Is there a similar movement? Is there kind of fear about, a singularity type AGI, runaway AI phenomenon? Are people thinking in these terms, or is it a little bit more loosey goosey in terms of that?
Well, there's a kind of unique cultural thing in the West, and particular in the Anglophone West, I would say, um, where this anticipation of AGI or fear of AGI has almost turned into a kind of religion. So you could be on either side of it. You can either be like an accelerationist, so you're really anticipating like there's nothing more important than us getting to AGI as soon as possible, and or you could be afraid of it, and the number one thing you're worried about is existential risk from AI singularity. And those arguments are understood by people in China, but they just don't have as much emotional weight, because I think people are just more practical there. And they're also very pro technology there. So for them, like if you talk to an AI researcher there or a CEO of a big internet company there, they would be familiar with these issues, but they just wouldn't have as much emotional weight. And you generally wouldn't find, there are a lot of young people who are like either effective altruists or they're like hardcore accelerationists who just want to like push things forward in the US. And they're literally like living like in a cult environment. Like there are people who are like living in group houses in Berkeley who spend all their time writing about AI safety, on the site Less Wrong, for example. There's just these small subcultures that actually do dominate a lot of the discussion as far as safety goes, that are much more present in the West than in China.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, and there is a certain kind of millenarian quality to religious,
Yes.
to philosophy, to everything that's very Western. I mean, that just, I guess, like a Confucian perspective just doesn't have that itching for the end of the world, which seems to kind of crop up every generation or so in one way or another in the West. I mean, coming from Eastern Europe, that's we don't really, except for maybe some slight biblical references that no one really cares about in Orthodoxy. There's no expecting the end of the world like there is for the English or Anglophone world.
Right. Now being an American and working in AI research, I actually think in a way, like, okay, the American side is overreacting a little bit too much. And in a way, the Chinese side is underreacting a little bit, in the sense that I think as we get toward AGI and ASI, where S stands for super intelligence, as we get closer to that, there really will be big order one changes in society that are very unpredictable. And I think the Chinese side is like a little bit discounting that too much, and the U.S. side is sort of emphasizing it too much. So I would say I'm kind of in the middle between those two extremes.
Yeah, I mean there is an argument to be made that we're already kind of ruled by superorganisms, maybe not of that quality, but even just like the global economy itself, it's an external entity. It essentially has a mind of its own. There's no one operator. It has a certain logic, but it's not always predictable. If it was very predictable, then a lot of people would be making more money, but they don't. There's boom and bust cycles that are hard to control. So it's probably just the quality of any sort of high scale entity that's not centrally controlled, maybe more so in China, less so in the West, that just has its fingers in everything.
So going back already more than 15 years ago at sort of fancy tech meetings where people were able to like, entertain all kinds of speculative things about the future, people were already comparing giant corporations to super intelligences, right? Because it's smarter than, and it knows more than any one person knows. It can reach out and do a bunch of stuff in the world economy, and it has its own kind of motivations, which are not the motivations of any single human. So yeah, so that analogy is pretty familiar actually to people in Silicon Valley. I think the qualitative difference is really, these are potentially very alien kinds of intelligences that we're creating, and different even from large corporations and governments. So even more different than that kind of thing that we're familiar with. Now, I should say that at a technical level, we're quite far at the moment from AIs that actually have their own motivations. Like so far, we're just building them to like respond to, we prompt them and then they give us a response. And we haven't really worked hard on giving them autonomy to do stuff. We're starting to do that with agents, so-called agents, but it's at a very early stage. And one of the things I like to emphasize is that although the simple Turing test, so Alan Turing concocted this simple thought experiment about, to try to detect when a machine could be considered artificially intelligent. And he said, oh, if I can have a long conversation with it and I can't tell whether it's a human or a machine, then it's considered to have passed that test. And surely the weak version of the Turing test we've passed, because many people actually have conversations with chatbots now, and they don't know whether they're talking to a human or not. But a more sophisticated version of Turing's test is where the tester has some specialized knowledge. Like suppose like I'm a physicist, so I understand quantum mechanics very well. And suppose the model, the AI doesn't understand quantum mechanics very well, and I try to teach it. I try to like teach it something de novo that it wasn't already pre-trained on, and watch it try to learn what I'm teaching it. Currently, models are terrible at that. So if I'm trying to do research using the latest, reasoning AI, and I catch it making mistakes, it's very tough for me to correct its mistakes because it will default back to its training data and what it's seen during training. And so it doesn't actually really pick things up in real time. And on that particular characteristic, we're very far from passing the Turing test. And I think it's that kind of thing that would allow the AI to operate in the world and threaten us. And it doesn't really have that capability right now. If conditions change in a way that are not something that it's already seen in its training data, it really can't adapt. Whereas Google or Microsoft as a super organism could adapt, like the board of directors and the C-level officers could change the direction of the company if something new popped up. But the AIs currently can't really do that.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting that you say that that's kind of the one of the main constraints of the hard Turing test, because that's exactly where I've seen AI fail multiple times, because I've tried to use it to, parse data and then try to kind of iteratively correct the way it parses data,
Yes.
but it always forgets the previous error correction. And then at one point it just kind of cracks and I have to move on to do it some other way. But it's so, yeah, it seems like that's a big issue. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about kind of the collaboration between nations. Obviously, there are a lot of Chinese researchers in the U.S.
Yeah.
There are certain tensions. Obviously, the U.S. wants Chinese intelligence to further its efforts in AI, but also it's a bit hard to know exactly which loyalties these Chinese researchers have, how they might contribute to AI growth in China. So what do you think about, especially with the new talks about immigration, H-1B, genius visas, all these types of things? Is it more positive for the US to continue to try to attract as much Chinese talent? Or is there an argument to be made for restrictions on Chinese researchers because of the competitive nature of AI research?
So the base level thing that most people don't understand, but which, if you do a little bit of research, you can figure out, is that if you want to just track high level talent in the world, like look at the Romanian math Olympiad team, what happened to those guys, right? What happened to the top graduates of École Polytechnique in Paris, right? So suppose you're able to track high level human talent, right? One calculation that you can do right away is you can say, well, Chinese used to be very poor. Now they're wealthy enough that they have a very good education system. About 60% of their high school graduates are able to go to college. It's a similar number, a similar percentage to the United States. Okay. So they have a base population which is 4x the United States. So that means they're producing roughly 4 times as many total college graduates as the United States. But extra twist, about twice as many of their kids who go to college have studied enough math and stuff in high school that they can do a STEM major. So there's about 2x more STEM majors per capita. Per college students, there are 2x more likely to be a STEM major than in the United States. So that's an 8x. So 4 times 2 is 8x. So it's almost an order of magnitude. So China's producing engineers and scientists, people who could work on AI at almost like a 10x rate of the United States. And actually, if you compare China versus the rest of the world in total, those are comparable. So China is basically producing as much talent as the rest of the world combined. And you see that if you then do studies, there are certain think tanks that actually do careful studies of like all the people that are publishing on deep learning, neural nets, transformers, the specific really hot technologies used in cutting edge AI. Where did those people, for example, go to college? Okay. And it turns out in the US, something like, it depends a little bit on how you define the set, but something like 40 or 50% of the leading United States AI researchers, their undergraduate college degree is in China, came from China. So about half of, if you go to OpenAI and just walk around, you'll see a lot of people who look pretty Asian, maybe are even speaking Chinese to each other, right? And it's about 50%. It could be 40%, 30, 50, it's some number like that. And that's in the US. But then there's a comparable set of people who are staying in China and working at the AI labs there. So number one observation is a very small fraction, I would guess no more than 10 or 15%, maybe 20% at most, of leading AI researchers in America come from America. Okay, so, it's like, oh, half are from China, 30% are from the rest of the world, Europe and, Japan and India, and then like, oh, 20% actually grew up in America, right? So if we actually didn't admit geniuses to the US to work on AI for us, we would really be in trouble. We're able to keep up with China, maybe stay a little bit ahead of them by admitting lots of geniuses, hoovering them up, not just from China, but also from Europe and India and all these other places. Okay. Now, in the H-1B debate, people get very exercised because there's sort of two categories. The ordinary H-1B visa, the people who get that are usually not geniuses. It's usually some company or even some outsourcing consulting company, like an Indian company like Tata Consultancy. They're bringing people in to work in the US for less than what a US software developer would make or a US chemical engineer. So that is actually a kind of labor arbitrage, which, really hurts American workers, I would say. And it really isn't getting the cream of the crop. Some of the H-1B people who come in are the cream of the crop, but most of them are not. There's another visa called an O-1, which is for aliens of extraordinary ability. And there the threshold is much higher. Like typically you would have had to publish some impactful scientific papers in top journals. You have to be well known in your research field, or you could be like, world-class grandmaster in chess, or like Olympic medalist in figure skating. Like there are different ways you can qualify as an alien of extraordinary ability. Those people, if they're on the technical side, really are super valuable to the United States. And so it would be, in my ideal world, we would decrease the ordinary kind of H-1B thing, which is huge, decrease that in size and improve the quality of filtering, and expand the alien of extraordinary ability set to hoover up more really top people to the United States. So that, as an American, that's what I would suggest. Now, on the question of mixed loyalties, you do have a lot of Chinese people who, like, maybe they did their undergraduate degree at Beijing University, and then they went to grad school at Stanford or something, and now they're working at Microsoft. And you could say, like, is this person loyal? Like, what's going to happen? Is this person going to steal a bunch of secrets and bring them back to China? I would say, number one, there aren't that many secrets left like there aren't that many places where the US is really ahead of China by a lot. And so like that ship has sailed. So basically like in almost every technical area the two countries are kind of comparable. Like US could be a little bit ahead, China could even be a little bit ahead, or they could be roughly the same. So the spying thing is, I think, not as big a threat as even 10 years ago people would have said it was, or said it was. But I think now it's like not really that decisive. In terms of like whether these people are loyal, I would say actually on average they are pretty loyal. Maybe they're more likely to spy for their home country than someone who grew up in, a European American who grew up in Kansas. But the absolute probability that any one of these people is going to do some spying for the other side is very low. So it's like, oh, you bring in 1,000 of these guys, 995 are going to be extremely productive and loyal citizens of the U.S. and, take their kid to the baseball game, little league baseball game, and maybe 5 out of 1,000 maybe are going to be doing some spying, and like just how damaging is that? What's the trade off here? So I actually don't think the U.S. can compete at all with China in particular. I mean, of course they can still compete with Germany or the UK or something, but they can't compete against China unless they are sucking in vast amounts of talent from all over the planet.
Is it similar? Because when you think about quantum computing, which is related, but it's a slightly different field, the hardware is still very much in its infancy. The idea space is still quite large. China is following a slightly different, they're focusing on different types of technology than the US. Is there more of a kind of sensitive knowledge that's now being produced in the US that would give China a leg up or something like that?
I would say in quantum computing, so quantum computing is further from having a practical impact. And depending on which quantum researcher you talk to, depending on exactly how you define real world impact, some people would say it's 20 years away. Some people would say it's 10 years away. It really just depends, but it's just further away than AI for sure. And it is an area which really the main issue is laboratory science, is how to build like a functional, efficient qubit. And we still don't know what is the physical system that we're actually going to use to make scalable qubits that we need to do practical stuff. Unlike in the case of a semiconductor chip, we can already build these things and scale them. So it's just that field is in a different situation than AI. I would guess if you look at physics departments where there's a lot of research in quantum computing, again, like probably like a third of the students there or more are people who did their undergrad degree in China and then they're doing a PhD in the United States. So it's actually a similar situation in terms of like the talent calculus.
So do you think that in 10 and 20 years, if the hardware question kind of gets resolved, the efficiency issues, the actual scalability issues are ironed out, could this actually, be the explosive moment that this hardware technology does give AI a completely different dimension to work in?
I think what will happen is so to be really specific, like there's sort of two uses of quantum computing, one which you can talk about, where one is much nearer term and one is much further away. The nearer term one is using quantum computers to actually simulate quantum systems, so that if we're trying to design a new material and we want it to have certain properties, it may be advantageous to use a quantum computer for certain technical reasons. That the quantum computer can better emulate the quantum mechanics of this new material that we're trying to make. And that is probably closer to being reality. Like in the next 10 years, maybe we'll have like the field of materials design or materials science will advance a lot because of quantum computing. The other thing, which is further away, but was the main technical breakthrough that got people interested in quantum practical applications of quantum computing, is breaking codes. Okay. And that's the thing that if we do build, it would take a machine that can reliably use like 1 million qubits. Okay. So it's quite challenging right now. Right now, the systems we build are like hundreds of qubits or something, or 1,000 qubits. We need to get to 1 million qubits. And that thing could then break the codes that we use to like transmit your credit card number to Amazon, or we use to encrypt government secrets. But, in the same way, like we could always just make the codes more like switch to different codes, which are more resistant to quantum computation, or lengthen the key make the key length longer of the codes that we use. So even that, like you could fight that a little bit. The main issue is that I think AI, I think we're going to reach really good AGI, like the passing the hard Turing test that you and I were just talking about. I think we're going to reach that before quantum computing really changes the world. So it may turn out that the way we get quantum computing working is we actually have AGIs and ASIs running on ordinary semiconductor hardware, helping us do the research that is required to push quantum computing over the edge. That seems more plausible to me. It's implausible to me that 20 years from now, ordinary AI of the type that we're working on now won't be extremely, extremely important in all areas of scientific research.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to imagine maybe a world in which China does gain AGI technological supremacy first, and in a way that just kind of wipes everyone out. What would that world look like? Is that something for the West to fear? Is that something, would it be better to have kind of a multipolar AI world in a way that kind of we have now, but it's not actually at the level that everyone expects it to be? Or is it more secure, more just more beneficial for everyone around if there's one global hegemon, as we gotten used to? It was the US, it might be China in the future. How do you see that?
Well, I'm not sure at all that there will be one AI hegemon. So what you're positing is, and like a lot of people on the US side that argued for chip sanctions, like not allowing NVIDIA to sell its best GPUs to China and stuff like this, and trying to prevent the Chinese from making their own advanced chips. Their picture was the US could stay like 5 or 10 years ahead of China and be the first to get to really strong AGIs or ASIs, and then that would compound, and then that would let the US stay ahead of really everybody else. And what you're talking about is, how worried should we be about the inversion of that, where the Chinese get 5 or 10 years ahead in AI? But it seems okay. I don't really know how it's going to turn out, but it seems actually to me more plausible that there's going to be rough parity between the two countries for a long time, and both will get to these really advanced AI capabilities around the same time. And even if one country gets there first, like a couple of years before the other one, I don't think it's that decisive. So another like fine-grained issue that AI people debate is the fast takeoff hypothesis. And to say it even more precisely, fast takeoff combined with fast impact on the rest of the economy and our military and things like that. And that seems very implausible to me, because as someone who builds AI systems, like my company, Super Focus, builds AI systems that are actually better than humans for things like answering the phone at a call center or helping you troubleshoot your big screen TV or something. It's actually better. It's actually superhuman. But the people who control the adoption of the new technology are slow-witted humans. And so even if you get there, there's this lag. Like you might be able to like do the job better than the million call center workers that are doing the job, but it's going to take like 10 years before the industry fully swaps out the human labor for the AI labor. It doesn't, the people who are most like obsessed with AI are usually like younger people who have never worked in the real world. They've never seen how decisions are made in government or in large corporations. And they just think like a little switch flips like this, and suddenly you just swap out the old technology for the better technology. It doesn't work that way. There's a very long lag time. And with something as like strange and alien as, this AI thing we developed, it's smarter than any human, we should just listen to it all the time. Think how long it's going to take for the leadership in the White House, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, to like decide, yeah, this young whippersnapper Sam Altman is right. I should just like outsource all my thinking to this thing that he brought into my office. Oh, and all the generals on the Joint Chief of Staff, they're going to just suddenly outsource their decisions or their procurement decisions to this AI that Sam brings them. Probably there's going to be a period of time where people just are resistant to it. You're going to have like a lot of safety people who are resistant to it, if nothing else. But just in general, like people don't adapt to change. Humans don't adapt to change that fast. And, I see this firsthand as someone who founds deep tech companies because it always takes longer for people to adopt, oh, embryo screening, there's like the benefits are unbelievable, but what fraction of the people actually adopt it? It's still rather small, right? So even if one country is a few years ahead of the other one, the main issue is like how fast are their leadership going to adapt to using that technology properly? And that's an additional degree of freedom, which has nothing to do with exactly what the maximum tech level of the companies in those countries is.
Yeah, I think this is a really useful layer to think about it. Just status incentives for the people in government and, who's in charge. There's probably for now, for the leadership, a sort of kind of centaur model where, the AI is kind of in the back pocket and you use it, but you're the face. And I think that probably applies to a lot of industries. I know a lot of people are afraid that now, okay, marketing is going to be wiped out. I think for people who actually, marketing probably is a bit more sensitive. Radiologists, we've been hearing about the radiologists losing their jobs for long, but I could imagine that AI systems will be kind of a layer because people don't necessarily want to interact with machines and and they want someone to be a human gatekeeper to the information who's kind of in control of it, who's knowledgeable about the field, who can, have a personal touch conversation about the information, but the information to be good as well, to be checked by the machine. So I think, yeah.
I was just going to say, let me give you a very specific example in hedge funds. Okay.
Mhm.
So there, the objective function is very clear, like make money for your client or make money for the firm. Okay. And collect fees from your clients. Right. Now, if I just randomly teleport you to a big hedge fund in London or New York, you could have totally radically different experiences. You could end up at a fund like Jane Street, where literally everyone is a super fucking nerd. Like everyone looks like SBF, right? In fact, SBF used to work at Jane Street, right? And everyone there is just like writing code using AI, okay, using algorithms and AI to trade. And they're mainly setting up the AI to trade, and then they're just watching it to make sure it's not screwing up and to shut it off or whatever. But mostly they're just like letting it run, like prints money for them, right? That's one type of hedge fund. But you can go to another one, and there's a like charismatic leader who gives lots of public talks, like Ray Dalio, and he talks about the U.S.-China geopolitical confrontation and what's going to happen to the price of gold. And so you can see that like not everyone is convinced that we should outsource the most important things we do to machines. It's actually a very small minority of very nerdy, Aspergery people who are willing to run their hedge fund in such a way that they trust the machine intelligence. And everybody else is like literally like the same old hand waving kind of like con man grifter type stuff that's been in financial markets for 1,000 years. So now eventually the machines may just beat everybody and that'll happen. But the time scale could be a lot longer than the young EA type people think. It could just take a lot longer for humans to surrender control of the system to the AIs.
Yeah, I think it's just a worrying thing it's also kind of very much in the media, and it's also kind of playing into this trope of the end of the world. And a lot of influencers, you have Eliezer Yudkowsky and pretty much a lot of these very high profile EA people are saying that they're not doing investments anymore. They're just like slowly wrapping themselves in a shroud and marching towards the cemetery. It's like, okay, it's in 2 years nothing will exist, and it's just it's in the water, and they've been saying this for a few years now, but yeah, now it seems like things timelines are heating up.
I think to his credit, I think Eliezer, on most things directionally, I agree with Eliezer. So I agree that there is indeed in the long run, an existential risk from AI. I do believe that AGI, ASI is likely in my lifetime. So I don't actually disagree with him that much, but the emotional intensity with which those guys engage in this is much higher than me. And I also think maybe the timescales, we disagree about exactly what the timescales are going to be. Now, in the long run for my kids, I do worry because I think like in their lifetimes, maybe after I'm gone, machines really could just fully take over. And I'm not saying that that future won't come to be. I'm just it may be a little bit further out than what those guys are saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a way, not to be the internet doomer, but it has taken over in a way that really hasn't been, the way I live my life and my relationship to on the online world is a complete divorce from what even just my mother lived, and even more so from what my grandmother and people before her. It really has been already like a seismic shift and how we negotiate the world. I'm already fairly kind of an android with my little device, and I'm dependent on it for so many things, and it plugs into the delivery systems of the global economy. Like I don't go buy groceries, I have them come to me, and all sorts of things like that. And it seems to be the direction that things are going. And I know people are really chafing at this. They're saying, okay, no screens for the children. But I really wonder, like, how there's not real there are no breaks on this. You could just say, okay, my children will be Luddites until 18, and then just at one point you have to let them out of the basement, and you have to confront the world as is, and make their way into it. And I don't know, I'm personally a bit conflicted about how to manage this myself. I see the immense utility of it, but I also see that kind of my flesh hardware isn't, the interface is it's got bugs. I cannot integrate with the machine. Maybe Neuralink will help, whatever. But for now, there are mental issues. There are, there's a certain depression that takes you over if you're constantly in this field. There's, info hazards that you're exposed to every day. There's sheer quantity of it. There's the fact that, you can't really modulate your attention to actually use it for the best purposes, to actually achieve your goals in relation with the technology. So, I wonder if this is, kind of just a trough of the creative destruction cycle, where it's like, okay, we've had this revolution. Now we're in the trough where, all the issues are apparent, children with the ADHD symptoms from overexposure to technology, people are fragmented, they don't know, they're scrambling. And maybe the upswing will be much better because we'll learn how to handle this. But for now, I'm in the trough. I'm kind of flailing. I don't know exactly how to treat this. Yeah, I hope, either technology will save us or destroy us, which just seems to be like the core mythos of the West now. But yeah, I wonder what you think about this.
Well,
You know,
I'm in a very special generation because I'm older than you are, and I reached adulthood before the internet was a big thing. And I had early access to the internet through the university and physics research and stuff. So probably had an email address when I was like, I don't know, 19 or something, very much earlier than 99.9% of the population. But it wasn't really a big part of my life until I was a full grown adult. So I remember that old world, what it was like to be a kid in the 80s. And, but since then, I participated in, the internet boom and then now AI stuff. And I'm a pretty aggressive user of technology. I'm always looking for an edge. Like if the AI can help me with something, I'm like, dude, and I'm actually quite impatient. Like there are certain innovations that I think are possible, and I wish were rolled out more broadly so I could use them. Um, I have to say I don't really understand my kids' generation. So my kids are in college now, so they got to a certain age. I can't remember exactly when they first got phones, but it might have been like in junior high school or something. And um, we were trying to control their access to the phones, and I think my kids weren't quote damaged that much by it, but their generation is just very different. Like it's just mind boggling to me that on a Friday night, the kids can just be like chilling in their room and they're like just chatting with their friends, and like that's good enough. That's like their social engagement. Whereas like when my brother and I were in high school on Friday night, we would be out. I grew up in Iowa, so we were out driving around with our friends, drinking, doing crazy stuff, physical stuff, and just physical proximity with our friends was really important. And I can't, don't really understand this new generation. And probably your kids are quite young, or kids, I forgot, but are
have
quite
to,
young.
yeah.
And so, yeah, and so they're going to face a totally different future. and you're going to have to decide exactly when you're going to give them the screen. One thing I've seen many times in airports, and maybe you've seen it too, is, I'm going through some airport and there's some lady with a kid in a stroller, and the kid is just screaming, like just insanely like loud and screaming. And I'm like, what's going on with this kid? And the lady takes a phone out of her purse and hands it to the kid. And that's exactly what the kid wanted. He wasn't screaming because his diaper was messy, or he was screaming, she or he was screaming that loud to get the screen. And when the kid gets the iPad or the phone, quiets down and just immediately starts playing with it. And these are small kids. And that just freaked me out because that was never the case with my kids. My kids, when they were that small, did not have screens to play. So it's affecting their brains very early in the development, and who knows where it's going to lead. I have no idea where this is all going to lead.
Yeah, I mean, for our kids, we just kind of defaulted to the screen attitude that my parents had. Actually softened it a little bit because in my house, the TV was going nonstop. The TV was just like a fixture. It was always something was on the TV, some channel. But now they can watch on the TV screen. They can watch like a Disney movie. We have like a set of things on a server. They can watch whatever they want. Probably watch Frozen for the 2000th time, every morning. But it's on the TV. But I think the personal screens, the engagement with it, the absorption, the fast moving, the fact that you can change, it caters to your whim. But actually, my older toddler figured out voice assister. I don't know what that's called because obviously he can't write, and he likes robot vacuums. So he figured out that there's a microphone button on the Apple TV remote, and it just says "cats on robot vacuums." Robot vacuums with hamsters. There's all sorts of things on YouTube apparently where animals are interacting with robot vacuums. And he really likes that, and somehow he figured out how to get into it. So, don't worry about the AGI. Worry about the AGI in your house.
Our startup, Super Focus, we specialize in building AI systems where we have a language model in there, but we're able to constrain its behavior so it behaves predictably and it uses only a predefined knowledge base. So if it's like helping you figure out the delivery, what happened to your package, look up your account number, give you a refund, it'll just stay in that confined universe. And we're actually designing something right now, which is a plush toy. Okay. So it's literally a plush toy that a little kid can carry around, but it's got an AI brain, and it will teach your kid a second language. Your kid can have perfect American accented English like you do, which, Alex, when I first started listening to your podcast, I was really impressed because I didn't know your background, and I thought this woman's English is fantastic. And I thought you must have lived a long time or grown up in the United States. And then I heard you say on the podcast that you had basically just learned it yourself, even though you grew up in Romania. But most kids can't do that. And so a little plush toy that, for example, speaks to your child in unaccented English while the kid is still in that window where they can absorb languages really well, you could have a whole generation of super multilingual kids who picked up 4 languages from their plush toy by the time they're adults. So that's like a positive thing that could happen from AI. Of course, they could be addicted to their plush toy. You never know.
I know the thing is, I mean, anything that's interesting enough can become addictive. I mean, that's a problem with platforms like Twitter.com. It's just like the thing is, if you were to make this plush toy constrained enough for it to be interesting, but not, have it access pretty much the infinity of all information online, so that it's infinitely interesting. I think I would buy it.
Yeah, that's our core competence. So we would sell parents like the English pack, English 1 or English 2, or the adding numbers pack, or the bedtime stories from the Brothers Grimm is too nasty. Bedtime stories from Aesop's Fables, pack, or the Tolkien stories pack. And like you're constraining the thing. So it'll talk to your kid a little bit, but it'll keep suggesting like, would you like to hear a story now about Frodo? And then it just, so it's a very constrained type of behavior that parents are okay with the kid carrying around with them. And what's interesting is a kid would still probably like prefer if you just handed them your phone instead of the plush toy. But a lot of parents don't want to hand them the phone, but they want something that's a little healthier for the kid to interact with. So that's kind of our design goal.
Oh, that's perfect. As a parent, I say that's amazing. And speaking about children, obviously this is another one of the impending global catastrophes that we're heading towards, slowly careening towards, fertility issues. And I know, in the US, I've talked about, a lot of, the issue with total replacement fertility. It has not been reached. Doesn't look like it's gonna. Same in Europe. China, slightly different case, but also I think the issue in China is that, especially in the cities that are the centers of elite human capitals, areas where people kind of flock to universities, fertility is especially hit. I mean, what do you think about the impact of this? Like the strangling of fertility in the cities and in the major centers, and you talked about 8x. Is there a possibility that that number is going to go down really fast, and that the human capital supremacy of China will be affected by fertility
Yeah,
issues?
so this fertility issue and demographics is something I think I often listen. One of the things I like in your podcast is I think it's a theme that you're often focused on, and so that the numbers for China are the following: that over the next 20 years, right? So the kids that are going to enter the workforce over the next 20, 25 years are already born, right? So a kid that just was born today is going to enter the workforce in 20 or 25 years, right? So the next 20, 25 years in China, and actually any country, is pretty predictable. Like, you have older people retiring, and then you have new people entering the workforce. So in China, what's going to happen for the next 20 years is there's going to be a 10% decrease in the overall workforce, but the average education level of the workforce is going to go way up, because the people that are retiring now experienced, they grew up in the 1980s or something, when China was very poor, and they did it. Only a few percent of them could go to college. So people retiring are not at all highly trained. People that are entering the workforce now are highly trained. So they have a huge human capital benefit that they're going to experience over the next 20 years. But if they don't fix the TFR, which is close to 1 now, then they're going to fall off a cliff. So they're going to fall off a cliff in 20, 25 years. Same is true, though, for Italy, the United States, any country that is advanced. The people within that country that are able to go to college and learn STEM skills, that subpopulation also has a TFR of like 1. So now in the US, we have these other populations that have higher TFRs. And so, like, in America, we fool ourselves. Like, the Italians can't fool themselves because their overall TFR is well below 2. But in the US, we fool ourselves because we say, oh, we have a TFR of 2, we're going to be okay. But if you look more closely, it's very bad. The ones who are going to staff the highly skilled jobs, their TFRs are not 2, but the general population is 2. So the ratio of high skill, low skill people is not going to evolve in a good way in the United States, even though the overall population isn't necessarily going to shrink. So that we have a demographic problem of a slightly different kind in the United States, unless we solve the education problem and we're able to bring everybody up, but we haven't figured out how to do that. So every country in the world 20, 30, 40 years from now is going to face some real problems, unless at some point in the next 10 or 20 years, they somehow manage to get the TFR back close to 2. And I just don't know how to do that. I am sympathetic to, I think you've discussed this on your podcast, and I've discussed this elsewhere when people have interviewed me, that in a way it's when, so I experienced first wave feminism when I was a kid growing up in the 70s. Women were heavily discriminated against in the United States. You were expected to work at home. All my friends in my elementary school, their moms were stay-at-home moms. It was very rare for the mom to work. And also, it was very rare for the parents to divorce. Any kid who was from a divorced family was considered like at serious risk by the school system and by the neighbors and all this. So the values changed completely. And now that women are encouraged to pursue your career, go on Instagram, travel, of course they're not going to have as many kids. Of course they're not going to let the father keep everything onto them the way my mom did everything at home. My dad just came home from work and put on his slippers and smoked his pipe, and my mom brought dinner out. Nobody lives like that anymore. And so I think it was a totally predictable consequence of these first, second wave feminist things that were happening when I grew up, that we would later have a demographic crisis. And I don't know how to get out of that unless we have some sudden religious like shift where women suddenly decide they're willing to go back to being like you know, more tradition to occupy more traditional roles. I think unless they do that, we're doomed to have another generation or two of this.
Yeah, I think that's, obviously part of it, but there's what you were describing about your kids, sitting in their rooms in college and, interacting socially. I think there's also like a dearth of opportunities to mingle with the opposite sex. There's just understanding friendships with the opposite sex. I think a lot of people are just getting information from, now there's ubiquitous information about the nature of men, the nature of women, is it's quite scary. And then obviously the main platform where people interface is essentially Instagram on your phone. Even if it's Tinder, it's just, photos based. It's like maybe someone reads the bio, not many people do. It's very limited and it's a depressing process for a lot of people. So I think just the opportunities for meeting at every level, the opportunities for understanding at every level have kind of departed. And yeah, creating modern marriage is still, I think, also in the trough of the creative destruction process. I think a lot of millennial men, when I would count my husband in this as well, he is, someone who's not like his father at all. He's very involved with our children. I feel like we have a really solid marriage. I feel like we really are partners. But, I see a lot of my friends, and in the past I'd be like, oh, they're unmarried, they don't want to get married, they want to travel, whatever, Instagram lifestyle. But at the same time, I see their male counterparts, and I feel like I would have a bit of an issue, with especially people, this is Romania I'm talking about, guys are still kind of the get home, smoke a pipe, put their legs up type situation. The women are working. A lot of them are, bringing in quite a lot of money. As far as I know, in my circle, they're making more money than the guys. And it's just, it feels like a tall order to, without, social imposition, because that was in the past. In the past, you were a pariah if you weren't married by semi-arbitrary date. And everyone around you was, there's also kind of the social circle implications. I remember my mom told me she wasn't maternal at all. And I also am not very maternal, but she told me she didn't want kids. If there wasn't peer pressure, if there wasn't like the whole of society breathing down her neck, she would have not done it. So she said, "Okay, I'm 27. I got to do this. It's late. We need to do this." So she just kind of, conceded to peer pressure and did it. But that's just not the same situation. But one thing I do know is that, the girls that I know, the women that I know, they do want to have families. They are looking for this kind of partnership model. And I know men also want to have that part. I think maybe now we're just in the nitty gritty of negotiating what this might look like and to make it so that, it's mutually beneficial. I think it is really tough. I had to go abroad to source a husband to make this work. But yeah, it is a kind of a cultural issue now. And I don't know what to, counsel these girls to do, because as a woman, I think one of the scariest things that you could do is to marry some guy and just have a third kid in your house, a guy that you have to take care of, you have to cater to, obviously, because that's the expectation. Some guy that you have to mother in addition to your children, and obviously now it's a dual income situation in addition to your own job. So it's just yeah, I'm not sure where the exit from this trough will be, but I hope it's looming on the horizon. And I do know, that a lot of people are in good marriages. I include myself in this, and it is possible. People,
Yeah.
it's just
I think it's possible, but like if you run the numbers, right? So in the past, okay, there's one question like, are the men of today worse than like in my father's generation or something? Maybe they are, but maybe back then also you could end up with a childlike husband who wasn't working very much and was drinking too much at home. Like, but women just were forced to stick with that because the whole, as you said, the whole of
Mhm.
society force was to keep them in that situation and make sure the kids grew up okay. Whereas now it's like the woman can just say, "Hey, I don't want that. I'm leaving, and I'm just going to go travel with my girlfriends, and there's no kid." Right. So around the edges, I just see it pushing fertility down, and also very few women have the stamina today to say like, I'm going to have 3 kids. So like some women are opting out with 0 kids, and very few women are going to have 3 kids. So that TFR is going to be at best, 1.5 or something, or one, even down to 1, depending on where you are. So I don't know. I just don't see any answer to that. Now, I don't know. We were all brainwashed in the 70s to be environmentalists. So I'm actually an environmentalist. We were taught that the main threat to the world ecosystem was too many humans. So I still have a little bit of that brainwashing in my head. And so I think, like, well, if there were fewer humans, instead of 8 billion, if there were 4 billion humans, actually, that would be much less pressure on the world ecosystem. And the transition is going to be very difficult for our economies and stuff. But in the long run, will we ever really run out of humans? I don't think that's very likely.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think, TFR will stabilize, and obviously it will select for people who instinctively are more maternal, more paternal, people
Right.
who
Exactly.
who
Yep.
will have kids. Will these people be so-called elite human capital? I'm not so sure. But yeah, it's but I do think there is one element, and now being a mother and being, a millennial mother and being like steeped into, internet culture, global culture, underrated factor in why people aren't having more children, I think, is just the level of parenting that has become the baseline. The
Yes.
level of safety required, the level of schooling, the level of, obviously I'm sure China is even more strict, but even here, I'm have to audition my toddler to get into, preschool, and he's on probation, but whatever, he's hopefully gonna get in. There's all sorts of, things like this I didn't expect. It's blindingly expensive for Romania, but it's just, it's little things like this, and obviously the gentle parenting. I have very rambunctious little boys. They just laugh in my face when I try to gentle parent them. It's just
Well,
they're
so probably you've read, or maybe you've interviewed Brian Kaplan. He wrote
yeah.
a whole book saying, like, you should be a little more laissez-faire with your kids, and that makes parenting much less burdensome, and it probably doesn't harm the kids very much. And I totally agree with him at an intellectual level. But when my kids were young, I was like a totally like high investment, hovering, trying to help my kids in every way, too nice kind of parent. So it's pretty tough, even though intellectually I totally endorse everything more or less everything he wrote in that book. I didn't actually carry it out. And I saw the book, or I read the book, but when my kids were still young. So it didn't work. So I don't know what it is about the current environment, but I know my neighborhood is super safe. Like these houses I'm looking out the window at are like $1 million. But would I let my kids when they were young, like, just walk around the neighborhood the way that I did when I was growing up? I wouldn't do it. I would be afraid to do it. And it's just stupid. It's a stupid fear. But somehow we would hover. We would be like, oh, where are you going? Where are you going? Are you going to be at Jane's house? Text me when you get to Jane's, like that kind of thing. Even though it's like a totally safe neighborhood, nothing bad ever happens, etc. But you don't want to be that parent, right? Where something bad happens to your kid and you're regretting it the rest of your life, right? So I don't know how to get out of that mindset.
Yeah, it is really tough, and it's increasingly illegal to just let your kids go
Right.
outside. I
It could
mean,
even be illegal. The things my parents let us do when I was a kid would be illegal now. They would get locked up. So
yeah, it's a strange place to be. I mean, our plan is to move to New Zealand, where, my husband grew up, and it's kind of almost like an oasis of the past there. It's kind of like England in the 1980s. Very homogenous. It's also, there are not that many people there. So it's like, if you're fear of stranger danger, there's probably, you run into one person every 3 hours. So it's, just the probability of a stranger that is also, having ill intent is very low. So yeah, I think that's going to be, and also they have schooling that, they have boys schools. Like in Romania, everything's very co-ed. It's like everyone, and I feel, it very much depends. Also, the parenting strategies always depend very much on the human capital that you're dealing with and the propensities, talents, proclivities of your children specifically. Because if I were to implement, the laissez-faire Brian Kaplan approach with my kids, things would go up in flames. Circuit boards would have forks sticking into them. They unfortunately need constant supervision, constant correction, constant saving. I don't know exactly how to do that with a laissez-faire approach. But yeah, there might be ways that I haven't explored. But yeah, and I wish I could Brian Kaplan it a little bit more, and I probably would have many more children if I had Brian Kaplan's kids. But
Yeah,
yeah,
like
it's
to give you a specific example, like my brother and I used to love to play with fire. Like we would burn things, we would like make things that were quasi explosive, and probably I'm pretty sure at least on a few occasions we came somewhat close to burning down the house or causing like a major fire in the house. And like today, like yeah, you would never, no one would even let their kids get anywhere close to that level of activity or danger. But it doesn't. It comes with some risks. I mean, you know, you know, you wipe out on your bike, you break your arm, stuff like that was very common when I was growing up.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, but there's probably some degree of safer, but my kids are still very small, so they're kind of like just big babies. So I just feel like, just give them a year more or two, and then just have a little bit of trust in their capacity to distinguish right from wrong, and then, we can Brian Kaplan it a bit more, a bit harder. Um, I know we're slowly coming up on the hour. I want to ask you the question of the show, which is, do you have a recommendation for an underrated thinker, someone, that's been influential in your life, but that you think does gets too little credit or too little airtime?
Wow, I remember that you warned me you were going to ask me this question, and let me. Can I throw out a couple names?
Of course, of
I'm going to
course.
throw out the names of a couple physicists. One whom everybody already knows, probably Richard Feynman, who was kind of a mentor of mine, and there's a finite amount of stuff from Richard Feynman, from his lectures to his popular books. I recommend all of that. There's another guy who's a contemporary of Feynman's named Freeman Dyson, who's a little bit less well known. And interestingly, like totally different style because Freeman Dyson grew up in a very elite British environment, but then came to the United States after the war. Um, Dyson's writing is incredibly elegant and beautiful. And so I recommend some of his books. One of his books is called Disturbing the Universe, which is a kind of memoir. I highly recommend those two guys. And then let me throw out a third guy, a guy called Stan Ulam, who was a Polish Jewish mathematician who was a close contemporary of von Neumann's. And so not very many people know who Ulam was. He invented the Monte Carlo method, which is used in science a lot now. And Ulam wrote a book called Adventures of a Mathematician, and I highly recommend that. That book is definitely not very well known in the general population, but it's definitely highly worth reading.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that last one I didn't know about, and it's a very good, interesting recommendation. I want to also point people to your work. I know you're on Substack, and I know you work on Super Focus, which you've described partially, but maybe you could give people a little bit of insight into how that works and where they can find you.
Great. Yeah. So I'm an unusual guy because I have pretty broad interests. In my main job, I'm a professor of theoretical physics and computational science. So I've like that whole academic side of things. And then over the years, I've founded a number of what people would call deep tech startups. And there are three startups that are still running that I'm a founder or co-founder of. And so one is genomic prediction, which if you're having a child, in particular, if you're using IVF to have your child, you may want to have the embryos that you and your partner produce screened genetically, which gives you a lot more information to choose which embryo will become your child. And you can reduce their health risks by quite a bit. You may actually increase their expected longevity by many years by going through this process. So that's one company. Another company is called Othram, which solves crimes using genetic genealogy. I urge everyone to support Othram. If you go to their page, you can see a screen of all the cases that we've solved. It's like 1,000, more than 1,000, probably cold cases, remains that were 100 years old or 50 years old that no one knew whose body this was, and we were able to identify the person, murderers that we caught. So, and you can, believe it or not, the police still have not adapted their methods to really take advantage of these new technologies. So oftentimes there's literally crowdsourced funding to pay for the police to have us genotype the sequence, the DNA that's in their cold case storeroom or something to solve a particular case. And there are people who are enthusiasts of true crime who like band together and they raise the money to solve some case from 30 years ago or something like that. It's very common actually. So Othram is that company, and then the most recent company I found is called Superfocus, which builds AIs that are very performant, but in a narrow kind of focused set of activities. They're not a general purpose chatbot that you can ask anything of. They will always push back to a particular set of things. Like, I will figure out what is with your account balance, and how you can change your address on record or your phone number. They'll do some narrow task, but they won't try to do everything. And so if you run a company and you are paying too much for your humans to do customer support, our AIs can do the customer support. We can do roughly the same level of stuff at about 1/10 the cost of what you're paying a human to staff your call center. And so if you're out there and you need anything like that, contact us at Superfocus.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. I didn't know about the cold case genomics company. That's amazing. I remember I was following the Golden State Killer case, and
yes,
not as precise, but yeah, that was incredible.
Yeah, there's a series on Netflix in Sweden. It was like the first case solved in Sweden, I think multiple killing, that was not solved for something like 10 or 20 years. But was finally solved using these methods, genetic genealogy. It's really good. It's like a maybe 4 episode miniseries. It's really good.
Oh, excellent. And I know they're trying to do something like this with the Jack the Ripper cases, but the source genetic material is not so clearly his. I don't know. It's apparently hair on a scarf or something like that. Not certain. But yeah, it's super fascinating. Thank you so much, Steve. This has been amazing. I want to also point people to your Substack. It's going to be in the link below. You're on Twitter. You're everywhere. It's going to be there. Thank you so much. This was great.
Yeah, it was my pleasure, and good luck to you and your family.
If you've enjoyed this conversation, please do consider becoming a member of the community, where you can get pretty much everything I've ever produced on Substack at alexkashuta.com or on Patreon at patreon.com/aksubversive, where you can find the audio of every episode ever recorded. This keeps the lights on. I really appreciate your contribution. Thank you so much for listening, and also like, subscribe, comment, do any sort of positive interaction that you find it in your heart to do. Review, potentially. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week.